Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm joined by a special guest and great friend and actually mentor, Arol Wolford. Arol, thanks for coming in and chatting with us today. Excited to learn more about your adventurous career and talk about some of your current projects. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Charlie. It's good to be here.
You know, Arol, let's start back in California. Let's talk quantity surveying. You and I have had some chats about that. Really inspired you to ultimately, I think, get into the construction data side of things, and that's where you built up a very large international company. So can you tell the audience that may not understand what is quantity surveying? Can you talk a little bit about that?
A quantity survey is actually very relevant to the energy movement. I know Bill McDonough told me, he said, Arol, this is a hidden secret. Quantity survey is laying out all the units and particular items in a building. So how many chillers are there in the building? How much curtain wall is there? How much carpeting is there? So as the name implies, you're getting quantities and doing a survey of the building. The tie-in to energy is normally quantity survey is used to figure out the cost of the building. You have to know how many lighting fixtures there are, how many, all the components of the buildings. Now, when you do that, I've always connected it to figuring out the cost. That's true. But as Bill told me, Arol, that's kind of boring, figuring out the cost.
Sure.
I'm going to give you something exciting. That's critical for energy as well, because I need to know how much curtain wall there is. I need to know how much drywall is to do, as an architect, appropriate analysis for the building. So that is quantity survey. An interesting fact, we do about $700 billion of commercial construction in the United States. Out of that $700 billion, about $70 billion
10%, yeah,
is used counting and measuring things.
Oh, wow.
Which is basically what quantity survey is. Now, the crying shame with that is that should be able to be cut at least in half. And that $70 billion means more money is being spent counting and measuring things in the United States than is spent for all of design. I'm talking about all the architects, the mechanical engineer, the electrical
10%.
engineer, the structural engineer, because that amounts to about $50 billion. So this is a huge, huge waste. And back into the energy thing, my wife, when she was 47, decided to go back and get a PhD in holistic architecture. And so she's at 47 and she goes to Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
And what was amazing is she aced it. I mean, literally all A's except for one B+. So she did that. And I kind of said, hey, honey, we went to college together and everything. And we had about the same GPA, but I would not want to get in the ring with you now. How did you do that? I mean, that's amazing. And she was an English lit major.
Okay.
So she goes to Georgia Tech in the engineers school, although it's very diverse. And what she did her PhD on was holistic architecture, which really means kind of a balance between what I call FACE. That's my acronym for what she does. But it's the function of the building, the aesthetics of the building, the cost of the building, and the environmental impact of the building. All four of those things are very important for the architect and engineers. To balance those four things out is very, very important. And my passion right now and what I've spent my life with is, in a sense, fulfilling that PhD in a lot of ways. In other words, providing software to architects, engineers, and others to balance in the design, the function, the aesthetics. That's normal. And that was what modernists were tied into. But now we've added the cost of the building and the energy impact of the building. Those four things should be balanced together. And I've been working with a group of people to try to create software that empowers the architects and engineers to do that.
That's amazing. I know I have a respect for quantity surveying because I got my start when I got out of Georgia Tech, an estimator at a hard bid general contractor. So I respect quantities and digitizing and doing those takeoffs. Your father was in that business, right, out in California, and that really probably gave you an early look to get into the construction data, and you built CMD in the 80s and 90s. Can you talk more about that?
So my father recognized this. He was a mechanical engineer. He'd gone to Berkeley, and he was working with Carrier and realized, wait a minute, I'm supposed to do three things working with Carrier. Kind of the fun part, meeting with mechanical engineers to design the building.
Sure.
And then the economical part is make sure the equipment gets in the building, and I help the trade contractors, the mechanical contractors, to install it properly. But there's this other third part that just struck him as ridiculous. Here, there was an engineering shortage. This was during the 50s.
Okay, 50s, wow.
So 1957, in the 50s, and there was an engineering shortage. And he's saying, wait a minute here. I'm in this plan room with these plans doing takeoffs or estimates for these different projects that are going out to bid. And there's the train guy over there looking at the same set of plans after I'm done. And then after that, the Dun & Bush needs to do it. And I'm the Carrier guy. This is a huge waste. So he started a business called Material Survey Associates in 1957 in California. And he had a great business and ended up being a really neat business. It's still in existence out there in California now. I was a biology major with focused on genetics. That led me to my passion for market data. But I also really liked business. And my dad was a mentor to me for business because he had a nice business going there in California. I asked him if I could take his quantity survey concept and go to other parts of the country. So I was living in San Francisco, and I was what I would label a boring hippie. So it was the 60s,
Sure.
hippie time, late 60s, Vietnam, idealism, a lot of ideas going along. And as I say, I wasn't into drugs and I wasn't into sex, so I was a boring guy. But what people don't realize, there was actually a real strong Jesus movement in California at that time, especially Northern California. Even Bob Dylan became a Christian,
Right.
Things like that. So I was really tied into that, into the Jesus movement, still trying to do that.
There you go.
And so had a passion for people and an idealism. I do actually think that idealism that existed in San Francisco had a huge play upon Silicon Valley overall. The differentiations, one of the huge differentiations with Silicon Valley in the last 30 years and other parts of the countries is angels.
Right.
A mentor who, and it's not a religious term, but they are angels in the sense that they forgive you if you make mistakes. And really in Silicon Valley in the 70s and 80s, it was trying to actualize on your potential and having a passion to do that. And it wasn't if you failed. If you tried hard, gave it your best shot and failed, well, it's a learning experience. And you go to another angel or your same angel, and the expectation is that you thought things through well, that you tried to your full potential, gave it your best, and if it succeeded, good. But the interesting thing is if it didn't succeed, you weren't blackballed. The angel didn't hate you or anything. So it's an interesting concept. And there's also a concept of kind of abundance, that there's no lack of creativity when you're creating software. There's no lack of money creating software and technology. So I think growing up in Silicon Valley had a big impact on creating kind of an idealism. And then this aspect of doing business is pretty exciting. And when we started, my company wasn't material survey, it was manufacturer survey. I took my dad's concept, paid him a royalty,
nice,
and went to other parts of the country. And I got actually my friends from college and other things, and they were couples.
Okay.
So we had 8 couples be the foundation of this company called MSA that we started in 1975. And it was growing, and we would do the quantity survey. We did it with building product manufacturers, first starting out with mechanical, then electrical and architectural. And we would do the quantity survey for projects for building product manufacturers. So that's where we started. And then in 1981, I was kind of too naive and dumb to know any better, but Dodge Reports, which was really strong, they're a very fine company, but they didn't want me to do my quantity survey in their plan rooms. So I said, you're leaving me no other alternative but to compete with you.
Right.
Well, they were so powerful. They were like 250 million revenue company.
Wow.
And we were, so I take a mortgage on my house for $100,000 and started a company called CMD, Construction Market Data. Now people are like, what in the world are you talking about? That sounds so boring. Like, well, market data is actually, I think, exciting. If you're genetics and science, data is important. And I believe in business data is important, and you need to contextualize it. You need to make it market data. So we started CMD, and although I love San Francisco, I wanted this firm to be national. So I said, where should we start? I don't think San Francisco, because most of our people are going to be making like $30,000 to $100,000, let's say. Well, a house in the early 80s in San Francisco area started like at $500,000.
Oh, wow.
So if we've got people making 30 to 100,000, the mathematics don't work out so well. I tried to pick a place that I thought would be good quality of life, money and so on, the value of a home. We looked at Chicago and Washington, D.C., Miami, kind of Columbus, and Atlanta, and Dallas. And I checked those out and came into Atlanta. They had it's a real central part of the country. I didn't want to be north of that. It's too cold. I grew up in California, didn't want snow and stuff like that. So he chose Atlanta, and I did. And one of the things what was interesting too, for $100,000, you could buy a very nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath place for $100,000 in Atlanta, and that would cost at least $500,000 in San Francisco. So although I love Silicon Valley, sure, I love San Francisco, I wanted our company to be national, and we became national, and we used technology. I did have another mentor from England, Len Brown, and he had a data service over there in England. And so we linked up, and he was a great mentor for me. That's very, very important. I think if you could be starting a company, if you could have some trusted friends, mentors that kind of maybe have had the experience and are both a critical and encouraging type, that's kind of like the perfect mentor. And I know that was very, very important.
Yeah, that was one of my next questions, was mentor, because Jim Rohn says you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So you want to be leveled up and you want to pull some others up. It's so interesting, too, kind of fast forward to today. San Francisco is still probably that ratio of expensive income to home. And so many companies are moving to Atlanta, moving their headquarters to Atlanta now. State Farm, Mercedes-Benz North America, Porsche North America. It's just interesting. You chose to do that with your company in the early 80s. Let's fast forward a little bit to today. You've been credited, Arol, to be early in BIM and Revit. You took what you did in construction data, and I think you were in big data in the 80s and 90s before big data was even a phrase. So it's amazing what you did there. And now you're into the visualization. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from BIM and Revit to what you do today, like at VIM AEC?
Sure. With the construction market data, it grew. So it grew from, 3 people, including my father-in-law, and who moved out to California to stay by the grandchildren with my mother-in-law. Actually, my father-in-law and mother-in-law both worked with me when we started out. And huge credit to them. They were mentors for me as well. And I can't believe it, but from 1981 till 2000, when we sold CMD, we never got in a fight about business. They had some words for me about raising kids, which was
Sure,
tough,
of course.
but we never argued about business. Now, my wife was in the business when we were starting out, especially the quantity survey. But then I started having kids, and she wanted to focus on the kids. And the only problem we would have is sometimes we would be at the dinner table, and Ralph and Alb and I would be talking, and she'd be there, and she goes, "Okay, the 3 of you got to stop. We're not going to be talking about business at the dinner table."
Course. Entrepreneur.
So it was. There was a lot of kind of passion. And I think passion is a key. Now, passion to me is there's a formula in my mind. If you serve and are knowledgeable and enjoy what you're doing, you create passion. And that happens throughout your culture. So you can't fake passion, but it is important. I remember in CMD, we needed to borrow some money. I had sold CMD, and I started in 81 with a group of people, and we sold it in 87 to a company called Southam. And we sold it for, I think, about $5 million. Plus, we got to retain 15% of the stock, and they said they would invest another $10 million into us. So we basically grew from about $3 million in the next 10 years and to about $50 million. And that was good. And then at that time in 1996, we bought the company back with a venture capital firm. And, out of these 8 couples, 8 of them were still working with us. Actually, when we sold CMD in 2000, 7 couples were still there. An 8th couple decided to become missionaries in the Philippines. So that was it. If you're going to lose a couple, that's a good way to lose them. Yeah. So we all stayed together. 2 amazing things. None of them got divorced. Okay. So I think we were passionate about what we were doing. And I think it brought a real respect. The married couples, when the quantity survey business is kind of a sales role or an accounting engineering type of role, and the husbands and wife would choose where they're strongest, and then they became the boss of that, so to speak. So if the sales position is something the wife felt she was strong on, and kind of the engineering quantity survey estimating position is what he did, okay, but the rule became she's in charge of sales, he serves her.
There you go.
He's in charge of the estimating, sure, and she serves him in that. So there was a kind of a neat equality. I guess it's, again, kind of a the California thing carrying over. But it was very powerful. I think it's just amazing. We're in our early 60s, and none of them ever got divorced, and I think there was good roots. But there's good concepts there on how I think a corporation should act and the individuals with it. So as I say, if you could get passion, that helps. It's not something to be fabricated, but as I say, I think there is a formula, and the formula is the desire to serve, be very knowledgeable about what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, passion is emanated and comes back. So I think CMD, we grew, and we actually kind of worked with Dodge in promoting the industry in what we do and not criticizing one another. Okay. And needless to say, we sold CMD for $300 million in 2000. And then again, it sold again for $632 million last year. So it was successful. And of course, Dodge has been very successful too. So it's an interesting thing. So market data became popular. And what we started CMD was to be able to get the plans and specifications so we could do the quantity survey. In a sense, that lives on in that we needed a tool other than manual to do quantity survey. So I became a part in 1999 of a company called Revit. And it was led by this genius Leonid Riaz. And then we had on the board a guy named John Hirschsteck, who had started a company called SolidWorks. I guess I was supposed to be the guy who knew about the construction business, so I was there. Sure. And we all invested money into it, and it was great. Leonid was a project manager leader creating the software for the Boeing 777. Okay. The Boeing 777 was designed, built, and flown all virtually. Nothing tangible there. And that was in the mid-90s. So we said we should do that, with construction. Now, other people had the idea. There were a lot of people who were thinking about that. But led by Leonid, and we built this Revit software. And there's just obviously a lot of bright, good people leading it and idealistic passion. And we put about $25 million into the business. And 3 years later, we were doing $1 million revenue and $5 million loss. So one encouragement when you're starting your own company, realize it takes time. You have to hang in there, and you have to look, I think, longer term with most businesses. Sure. Sometimes an idea may turn, and it goes faster than that. But normally, it takes time. And then we had Autodesk came to us, and they paid $133 million for the business. And that was good. We were happy. I do get kidded, hey, you guys were actually very stupid because Revit is now worth $16 billion and you sold it for $133. Frankly, Autodesk did an awesome job. We couldn't take it to the next step. Okay. So we had a good software, but it took the money and the know-how from Autodesk. And the leader at the time with Revit was Carl Bass. He's been the CEO of Revit and Autodesk, and they did an awesome job. There were people like Carl, like Phil Bernstein and Raghi Iyengar who did the software, took it ahead, and it's a wonderful piece of software. Now, with Revit at this point, we were making the objects for Revit. In other words, Revit needs virtual lighting fixtures, ceiling panels, chillers. And the thing that I was really interested in Revit was finally we could do the quantity survey. And certainly we could create this quantity survey with Revit. And Carl said, Arol, I just bought the gun, but you need to keep making the bullets. Sure. So we have a business now that's still making the bullets or the virtual chillers and curtain wall and carpet, and that's called Smart BIM. So we feel that the building information modeling, Leonid used to say, Arol, when you're doing the eye in the BIM by making those objects, that's where the information could be created from. And he would say, hey, if we don't have the eye in BIM, we just have a BM. It might as well be a bowel movement. It's important to have that data. So I was still stuck on the data even when I was in Revit and still focused on trying to do this quantity survey. So I said, hey, Carl, if you'll do a quantity survey and allow us to use that with architects and engineers, and then, yes, we'll make the bullets. And we've been doing that for the last 15 years. And there is a strong quantity survey. But the factor was, this is, like in 2005, 2006 time, when we had we had objects or virtual everythings in a generic fashion, so we could do the quantity survey. And then, I had met Bill McDonough and got enlightened to the fact that 48% of the world's energy is used by buildings. Everybody thought in 2005, 2006, it was cars. And we even did a survey with the AIA and asked the question, who's the culprit? Who's putting out the CO2 and using the energy? 40% of the architects said cars. Right, pointing that finger. And only 7% said it was buildings, the maintenance of buildings, the building of the buildings, all forms of buildings, factories, schools, hospitals, residents. But 48% of the world's energy is a lot of energy. And Bill had shared that with us, and he said, your quantity survey then should be used not only for the cost, but also for the energy calculations and having all the materials lined up. So we're still working on that. We're still working on the face for the function and aesthetics. With Revit is a great tool for that. We've created a tool called VIM, or a concept where you go from a building information model to a virtual information model. So we take the Revit and translate it into the Unity gaming engine, and then all of a sudden, good things can happen. In other words, right now, Revit creates a beautiful 3D model, but the contractors and the manufacturers never see it. It's just the architects and engineers.
Sure.
And they're hard to access. Navisworks is a nice tool. 3D Studio Max is a nice tool, but 3D Studio Max, you don't get to roam around wherever you want to go. And Navisworks isn't that good visually. So the VIM gives the power of these gaming engines to allow subcontractors and manufacturer reps to see the Revit building. So now they get to see it in 3D, because right now, all they get to look at is 2D plans like 100 years ago. Now, with the VIM, you got a virtual information model that allows you to walk around the building and build the building better. Because now we could better move to, remember, with our overall frame of mind, it's to be like the 777, and that is you virtually design it, and you know what? That's being done real well now.
That's amazing.
But you need to see it in order to virtually build it, and it needs to be seen by the people who are going to build it, the subcontractors. Now we feel that they could do that better because they truly have access to a Revit model in which they can roam around. They could look at specific parts. They could tear off they could remove all the walls so they could see hidden things in the walls. They could focus just on the mechanical. They could focus just on the electrical. They could see it holistically and have everything there. So we really feel that the VIM will be a breakthrough. So the Revit, the VIM, and we could also in the VIM do it the quantity survey too. It does that as well.
Okay.
So we're starting to move down the line to actualize doing that. Now with that, we also share the data in the VIM model. In other words, you could go up to the lighting fixture, touch on it, click on it, and it gives all the data about that. It will give you all the data about the wall. So now we start to see the merging of data, relevant data, with visualization, and we call that virtualization.
And that can help with the environment, because we've collaborated. That would help my team with energy modeling. That would help my team with our LEED projects and the LEED movement and now the wellness movement. So if we can have that data in the models and we can make better decision with it, of course, we're going to not just get more LEED points, we're going to have better buildings.
Excellent point. Excellent. And that's the big deal. That's my passion. That's why you and I click so well, because we have a passion, along with a lot of other people, on sustainability, on wellness. So, and these are really tools that will help actualize that pursuit.
And a great Arol quote, you can't fake passion. So we got about 6 minutes left. There's so many takeaways though. And Arol, when I think of you, as I've gotten to know you, a great JFK quote, a rising tide lifts all boats. So you are so giving with information. You've done that throughout all of your businesses. And I think you're doing that here, talking about some of the hard lessons learned and some of the roadblocks and some of the successes. So thanks for being very open. But a rising tide lifts all boats. And we've got to share this information, share this data. Let's talk a little bit about some recent travels you've had to China and some visualization you're helping with there. But can you talk a little bit about the CEO trade mission you went on and what's happening in that part of the world?
I've got a good friend, younger guy than me, but we've been hanging out for the last 30 years, Paul Doherty. And he's been one of the leading lights on software and holistic thinking. And he and a few other people started this concept of smart cities, because that's really kind of where the action is. It's hard to move a whole country in a direction, but if you could take it city by city and originate the pride and the vision city by city, And it doesn't matter if it's in Paris, doesn't matter if it's in Beijing, doesn't matter if it's in Atlanta, So he is really a leader. And he had an opportunity to go to China and meet with Terry Branstad, who's the ambassador to China from the United States. Okay. And Terry is really a bright light on the environment, which is very important to China. If you go over to Beijing and Shanghai, they've got a real dilemma because they got to keep building. They need to do that. It serves their people. It serves their economy. But they got real pollution problems, and he knows that. And Terry Branstad, interestingly enough, is real good friends with the president and secretary general of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, who is a phenomenal guy, actually. Sure. And so Terry was talking, and we were sharing, Paul and I, our vision for the environment and for smart cities. And that included two products we have, Orbi, which is owned by the Digit Group, which is Paul, and it does really like good GIS, taking the whole city holistically. And then we've combined that with the VIM. So it's the VIM Orbi. So the VIM does the individual buildings and the data in them, and Orbi does like the GIS, the geological information systems, and does the big picture, and then we get the small picture with the VIM. So Terry liked this idea and said, hey, I would like you guys to come back. President Trump is having this trade mission on energy with Xi Jinping, really originated kind of from China. And I have political differences with President Trump, but it seemed like the right thing to do and a right cause because it's about energy. And it was a really enlightening meeting. So they had CEOs and executives. Of course, the Digit Group's CEO is Paul Doherty, but I got to hang out with him and go over there with him for that. He was invited and it was awesome to deal and work with the other CEOs from Chinese companies working with American companies. And in a 3-day period, they kind of had this. There's a guy from Goldman Sachs who's a leader of that called Lloyd Blankfein, and he's a legend in economics. And he kind of characterized it. It was speed dating and a telethon. So there was $250 billion of deals tied up there. Wow. And of course, then President Trump is able to say, well, the deficit was China was $500 billion in 2017. They just cut $250 billion off of it. Kudos to him and the group that did that. Sure. And it was interesting, very positive to see Xi Jinping and President Trump very respectful to one another. And Xi Jinping really gave the push on the environmental aspect as being a very high priority in China, and he hopes that the United States could come in with that. So I thought it was very powerful, but it was done with 28 multi-billion-dollar firms, and then our firm, which was there, just a little Mickey Mouse, but just to be there with them. And of course, what the Digit Group was pushing is software technology related to the construction industry.
Well,
so it was exciting.
It's refreshing to hear, that China, the powerhouse they are, has environment, hopefully top of mind there with the president. And you're humble. You are going to help with the visualization over there. So we could talk for hours. But let me just ask for some career advice for anyone listening as we wrap up today. I have a hunch, Arol, we'll have you back on the podcast. But what advice do you wish you might have received earlier in the career? A lot of those listening are maybe just now breaking into the green building movement, and we have an international audience too. So is there any early advice you wish you'd have heard?
Well, for me, there's an expression, it's better to be lucky than good. I think I was just blessed and fortunate with good parents, awesome wife, and which kind of meant relationships are so important. And if you can have some good mentors and be humble enough to listen to those mentors, that is really important. And one would be amazed how, older people actually want to connect with younger people, and it's an awesome relationship. So I think for men and women to be able to find mentors in business is really very important.
That's fantastic advice. Arol, thanks for being on the Green Building Matters podcast today. Really, really appreciate you telling those stories, and I admire what you've done in the construction data. Fast forward to the visualization and to what you're passionate about, and who knows what you're going to be able to achieve next. So thank you, Arol. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode, and you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast, tell your colleagues, and if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.